next speaker is Alan Lawson. He's a realist artist living in the mountains of Switzerland. A graduate and former instructor of the Florence Academy of Art, he paints from nature. Inspired by the work of Roger Scruton, Alan has developed an aesthetic, redemptive realism that examines the moral requirements of painting. He describes painting from life as being lost in contemplation, with one possible goal being the attempt to convey something out of that overflowing of thought and emotion. Alan founded the Alpine Fellowship, a nonprofit retreat for artists and philosophers. Welcome.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you very much. That's a hard act to follow after two very, very impressive speakers. If I pass out in the next 5 minutes, it's because somebody phoned me at 3 o'clock in the morning, thinking I was in Switzerland and it was the middle of the afternoon. But I tell you this because so my day started very early and turned out to be quite wonderful. I thought it was going to be awful, but then I bumped into John Seed going for an early morning jog. Then we ended up in Starbucks having a wonderful conversation. And then I ended up with some surfers playing guitar, and you know, I had about 5 hours on everyone else. And I tell you this because it links into some of the things I was trying to talk about yesterday. That for me, painting is less about image making and more about a way of life. A way of living, and in a sense what I've been trying to say is that the painting should come out of the living rather than the other way around. I also think, as I intimated yesterday, that we have become habituated in a particular way of seeing the world, affected by technology, I think to a large part. But greater than the actual use of technology, because of a worldview that we have accepted, and it's a worldview that tells us that all our problems and all our worries and all our human emotions are ultimately soluble, and that science is the great redeemer, and it's going to fix all these problems, and everything's going to be okay. And I think it's probably the greatest lie of our time. And that it isn't going to work out like that. We are all going to die and get sick and lose people that we love. And we shouldn't live in death denial, but quite the opposite. And the artist plays a very special role in society. The artist is a touchstone. They, in a sense, play a role, dare I say, a sort of shamanic role, in the sense of noticing those things that are not ordinarily noticed, and living a deliberate life. That's why we don't take the advice of our parents. We don't move to the city and become bankers. We embrace a life of poverty. We drag our wives into it. And we do this out of a childish vocation that arises in us from a very early age, that the thing we want to do is to represent something. And I think really what we're doing as adults is not so different to what we're doing as children. It's this certain love that we have, and when I remember as a young child, my uncle was a painter and my mother was a painter, and doing a little drawing, and that great feeling that you have when they congratulate you on it, and you think, oh, you're quite good at this, maybe keep doing it. And this wonderful feeling, I think, stays with us throughout life. We can't really explain why this is there. We're just driven to this kind of lifestyle, which doesn't make really any great sense. And if we accept that, then it seems strange to me that so much time in the art world seems to be taken up with talking about sales and marketing and things like this. because that's not the reason we got into this in the first place. So it seems we're just going to be disappointed. So the redemptive idea came in because I felt that we ought to, as this thing seems to be gathering some momentum after the dark ages that people like Dan Graves lived through, struggling to make paintings when nobody was interested, and forging ahead and really giving an opportunity for all the generations afterwards, myself included, to actually learn how to draw and paint. Because of that, we must remind ourselves, as things start to maybe go better, and maybe in 20 years things will be, will be a bit wealthier possibly. My wife would like that. Then, if that happens, we mustn't forget really the core reason of why we do this. And I have a couple of quotes here which have been, well, interesting to me. This is one by Fred Licht, who talked about Goya, and he says, "It was in his work as a painter that Goya discovered his own salvation." I think that's quite interesting. I think it tells us something that, in a sense, we are redeemed through the life of living as an artist. And it may not appear that we're getting much exchange from it at times, but I think perhaps at the end of your life, that will be some great solace. And the other quote is Thomas Mann, who said, in response to talking about death in Venice, he said, "When a critical intellect and great writer speaks of the general suffering of the world, he speaks of yours and mine as well. And with a sense almost of triumph, we all feel ourselves avenged by his splendid words." So this tells me that we can, in a sense, be saved as Goya was, but more than this, the handling by a great painter, and that's through the perfection of craft, can create a work of art which can take on a transcendental sense, that it can offer solace and joy and a form of redemption for generations to come. And the great examples of this, well, I'll give you two great examples. I think certain poems, I think, well, I don't know if this is a popular example, but for me there's a poem by Tennyson, "Break, Break, Break," and Tennyson was often mocked towards, after his death as being as sentimental and too technical. But I think that poem is quite tremendous, because there's a man who he's trying to deal with the death of his dear friend, Hallam, and he stares at the sea and he says these lines, "Break, break, break on thy cold grey stones, O sea." And then as we read it, we realize something so tremendous happening here. He's talking to the sea, but he's in the meter of the poem is like the breaking waves, and he uses this anapestic foot, which rises up and it breaks on certain words as though his voice is breaking, mirroring the breaking of the waves. And this offers a tremendous solace for people who are dealing with their own loss or grief. And the other great example is Rembrandt, and something like the hand of the father with the prodigal son, and that probably not proportionate, drawn with this sort of effect that we see in a lot of contemporary drawings. But there's a certain magnificence to it, of this sense of, I redeem you and I forgive you, and I always would have. And I think this is so powerful, and this is what we must remember above all else as we live our lives as painters. So that's more or less all I'm going to say. I think I'll leave it there. I was going to say something about Jeff Koons and Kitsch and Cab, but maybe that's going to come up anyway, and we can talk about that later. So I shall leave it there. Thank you.